I'm Sam Hazledine and I'm here today with Dr. Ash Bowden to talk about strategies specific to doctors to look after your body. Dr. Dumore, as he's known, is a doctor who really is passionate about improving health and well-being and happiness through physical activity. I've known Ash for a few years now and I've always been really impressed at just how much energy and consistency he brings to his message and his mission. Ash is deeply researched in this area, so he's not making it up, and he brings perspectives that I think go well beyond the standardized sort of out-of-the-box advice. And in particular, what I think has been really useful, and we've been preparing for this, is he's got strategies that are particularly relevant to doctors and to the unique challenges and I guess limitations, that we have, which are also opportunities that we face. Because, being a doctor is a unique and special job. And so we need ways to look after our bodies within that framework. So welcome, Ash. It's great to have you here. I'm interested, can you tell us what was the catalyst for, how you got into this? Why is this something that you really are so passionate about?
Yeah, of course. And thanks for the lovely introduction. The main thing, I had a sort of light bulb moment, as I call it, when I was working as a second year doctor. So in the UK, that was a foundation year 2 doctor in intensive care. And we'd do these ward rounds where we had incredibly unwell patients. A lot of them were ventilated and, unconscious with drugs going to help their heart and their blood pressure and all that jazz. And my job as the junior was to present each patient to the consultant, who would then come up with their plan and we'd talk about what we'd adjust and so on. And so I thought the most important thing was to know how quickly the butamine was running or how quickly the ventilator was running. So I'd present all this information, this is a 32-year-old male that's on X, Y, and Z. And we had this consultant who I later found out was the professor and the chairwoman of the Perioperative Exercise Testing Society. And she'd always stop me and she'd ask, what's this patient's exercise tolerance? And I was sort of caught off guard. I knew that, that was an important thing-ish to establish. How far can this person walk or run or so on? But the patient's unconscious. They've maybe been in intensive care for a few days after a car accident or a pneumonia or something. And I genuinely thought, how am I supposed to know how fit this person is or was? And she'd then quote the latest literature on how important exercise was for physical health, for their risks in ICU. And essentially their exercise tolerance would tell us their chances of leaving intensive care. That's quite simply, amongst everything else, whether it wasn't about the ventilator, it wasn't about how quickly the butamine and all the other drugs were going. Actually, if this person was fit coming into ICU, they had a really high chance of leaving ICU the right way rather than through the back door. And I just thought, this is mad. We're taught so much clever stuff at medical school, and we're taught to really understand our molecular science, our genetics, the respiratory system, all these complicated things. And here is this very clever professor telling me, actually, it's how fit you are. How fit you are is going to have one of the biggest impacts on your health. And I sort of thought, right, I'm going to bin all the other stuff. All I care about now is physical activity and the impact on health. And the more I started reading into that and practicing it myself, it's insane. The impact of physical activity and exercise on health, both physical and mental health, just blows everything else out of the water. And so it was sort of literally after that day, I went and found her after the ward round and said, how can I get involved in what you're doing, the research, whatever? And that's been my mission since. And a lot of the evidence talks about you don't all have to be marathon runners. It's about increasing your physical activity, doing more. And that's where the social media handle, the alias of Dr. Dumore came from. So yeah, that was the big moment.
What an interesting insight. And, it's very easy, I guess, as doctors, we are about disease management. We're also about health. So it's important that we understand that. But, it's obviously easy to extrapolate that out into how well a doctor can perform on a long day. How well we manage ourselves in terms of, at 4 o'clock after a big day, or how we showing up with our patients and things. It's, you can see how that could have an impact.
Yeah, definitely. And the nature of physical fitness, the word fitness is about how we can handle the demands of our environment. That was a definition that I learned in GCSE PE, back in year 10 or 11 or something. And again, yeah, actually think about that in a broader sense. We're not just talking about when you're on the athletics track, we're talking about our environment. How fit are you? How well are you able to handle the demands of your everyday, going home to your family, staying on long shifts, doing night shifts where you're awake at, ungodly hours, 3, 4 a.m. Actually, fitness is the key there.
We're going to talk about how you can achieve that within the limitations that we have: long hours, night shifts, things like that. I mean, one thing I thought that was really interesting as we were preparing for this is, the starting point that doctors are high achievers, and they all are. You have to be to get into medical school. So there is a selection bias there. And you look back at medical school, and I was always amazed that that people are great at music and sport, and they're generally quite exceptional people, and they are able to achieve mastery in areas by throwing themselves into it. And that seems to be the approach we have as doctors. Like, we launch ourselves into health, medicine, or whatever it is. But there's a limitation to that, because it can lead to an all or nothing approach. And I thought this was a really interesting insight that we talked about. Is, it works great to get into medical school. It works great to become a national representative at sport, or to become, a virtuoso at music. But when it comes to looking after your body, it can very much undermine a healthy approach. And, this is so applicable to doctors working long hours. And what I thought was really interesting as we prepared for this is, your insight that it's that old Pareto principle: 10 to 20% of the effort will get 80 to 90% of the results. So what happens with doctors with that all or nothing approach is they can't do all, so they default to nothing. And so what we're going to cover today, which I think it makes it so useful, is that 10 to 20%. The small actions that will enable the listener, the doctor, you listening this, to do the most and make the most of the limited time that you have to keep your body healthy. And the purpose of this episode is to make looking after your physical body achievable within those rigors of being a doctor. So I'm really excited about what you have to share here. And today we're going to talk about, firstly, why it's so important, and we've touched on that. But then we're going to dive into specific strategies, applicable for doctors, with regards to exercise, diet, and sleep. Those 3 pillars that are the foundation of a healthy body. So let's get into it. Ash, let's start with, we've already touched on it, but there's more to it. Why is this so important for doctors?
And I don't want to overstate this, but for me, well, we're dealing with well-being, right? Overall health. And these simple things, starting with exercise, we know that physical activity and exercise can reduce our risk of essentially every disease there is. And this isn't simple. It's very easy, especially because of our medical school teaching, to think of cardiovascular disease or diabetes, heart attacks, strokes, and cancers and so on. And in actual fact, the more you look at the literature, everything is impacted by our level of physical activity. And I think one of the things that states that more than anything, a lot of research nowadays looks at all-cause mortality, so our risk of dying of anything. That's not an ideal marker for well-being, but if you want to live longer, then we know that if we increase our physical activity level, we can do that. Another thing, and almost on the flip side of that, is I think as doctors, and initially when we're taught in medical school, there's a lot of focus on diseases and sickness, rather than the mental health, feeling good, preventing burnout, actually just having quality of life. Hopefully younger doctors are getting more of an education around quality and that well-being, and that more a model that's a little less biosocial, psychosocial. But we know that physical activity and exercise makes you feel better. It reduces our levels of pain and it increases our quality of life. And to me, it's like, what else is there? If not that quality of life, then so yeah, it sounds very. This is the thing that I'm hanging my hat on. This is the well-being initiative tool, whatever you want to talk about it as. That if we can get people focus on these real simple things to increase their lifestyle behaviors around exercise and diet, not really clever things like maybe you want to have a plunge pool, or maybe you want to do the sauna, but actually these are things that everyone can do, and it's stuff that we talk to patients about all the time. We're told to tell our patients about the lifestyle factors, yet actually we often don't look at ourselves and go, can I improve my exercise? Can I improve my diet? Just a small amount. And I think that's why it's super important. I can tell you about the statistics, but I think we'll hit that a little bit later on, maybe.
Well, so I mean, what you're saying, it's critical. It's critical that we practice what we preach. That that if we're going to teach health to people, that we do it ourselves. But it's also critical for ourselves as doctors if we want to show up and be at our best, or be as close to our best as we possibly can be.
Yeah, completely. And you said about that all or nothing mentality. It's so, I think we've all, whether it's ourselves or got a colleague that's doing an Ironman or a triathlon or something intense, right? When we think about exercise, and I still am bad for this. When I think about what I want to achieve with my exercise, I'm suddenly thinking about a goal or am I going to sign up to that race, or am I going to do this competition, and there's this thinking of like, it's not just what can I do right now. It's, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to achieve something. I'm going to go do this fully, So if I go to a CrossFit gym, it's not because I just fancied it one afternoon and I just dipped my toe. It's actually because I want to get into CrossFit and I'm going to learn how to do X, Y, Z and get super fit. When in actual fact, again, coming back to the research, and there's this graph in an article in the BMJ, and this is one of the first things I came across when I was first into it, that shows the dose response to physical activity with certain health metrics. So it looks at ischemic strokes, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and it's this exponential drop off. So actually all the gains happen really early on. So it's not just you have to be super fit and a marathon runner. It's really early on. If you go from 0 physical activity minutes to the WHO guideline of 150, then actually that's where you get the biggest risk reduction in all of those health measures. And then it's diminishing returns. And I'm not saying don't be a triathlete, don't do the Ironman, but actually rather than put yourself off by going, oh, I can't achieve all of that, so I won't do any of it. You're missing the low-hanging fruit, and all of the benefits come early, and that includes our mental health and reducing burnout and improving sleep. It's all right there, and I think we're all really good at talking ourselves out of it.
I don't think anyone's going to argue that it's important for us as doctors, it's important for us as role models for our patient. Let's get into those 3 areas: exercise, diet, and sleep. Let's start with exercise. What is it?
I love that you actually asked that first, because I think everyone I talk to has their own conceptions about exercise, right? And the majority of people, when I say the word exercise, they think running in the gym, and that's kind of it. And so, as boring as it sounds, I often start with the definition of exercise, which is repeated and structured physical activity to improve our physical fitness and health, which is a mouthful. But if we then simplify that, physical activity, so that's moving our body, in a repeated fashion, sure, to improve health. So it's movement to improve health. And that's how I like to think about it. Because when we think about it as simply movement to improve our health, suddenly we're not just thinking about running and the gym. We're thinking about dancing, we're thinking about going for walks, we're thinking about bike riding or gardening, we're thinking about anything where we can move our body. And the amazing thing with that simple sort of structure of thinking about it is that the research shows that it is just movement as well. They looked at, well, there's different studies that have looked at all domain physical activity. So not just your recreational exercise, but if you work in a job that's physically demanding, if you walk to work, that accounts for your physical activity. And they've showed that no matter what the movement is, it reduces your risk of heart disease, cancers, diabetes. You know, it's the same. And so again, it comes back to that, stop thinking about our perfectionism type A attitude of, if I do it, it has to be going to the gym 5 days a week, doing this program, or I have to be a runner now. Nah, just move more, and that will have the benefit.
I read a Stanford study a long time ago, and I think the mind-body connection with this is really important too, because this essentially looked at a housekeeping staff in a hospital who have very high levels of physical activity, but equally were, a lot of them were very overweight and had high blood pressure. Now, blood pressure was the metric that they chose to look at it. And so they took two groups, and they had one of the group who just kept doing the housework, housekeeping work, which, if you can imagine, if you think about it, like those of us who don't work in house, day after, hour after hour changing beds, it's very physical, but they just kept them doing it. The second group, they told them about what level of activity they were doing, and actually that they were doing a huge amount of physical activity in terms of fitness and things. And what was really interesting is nothing changed for the group that they didn't talk to, but the ones who knew that they were doing physical activity, their blood pressure came down over a period of 6 to 8 weeks, whatever it was. So I think there's a first part which I think is really interesting, is understanding that it's small amounts of activity even can give exponential returns. The second part is actually being mindful of the fact that I've just made a healthy choice. I've walked to work, I've used the stairs, I've done whatever, because you get those asymmetric returns just by doing a small amount and by knowing that you're doing something.
Yeah, definitely. And it's empowering as well, isn't it? Rather than making everyone, to do exercise, you have to go and do this thing. Instead, we can go, what are you already doing? And we can celebrate, oh, wow, yeah, you have a physically active job. How good's that? You're getting a lot of your sort of exercise quotient right there. And so that positive feedback, rather than, I think a lot of patients come in and they're talking to the doctor and they're sort of bracing to be told off. And it's the same with us. We beat ourselves up as doctors. Oh, I'm not doing enough. Whereas actually, if you look at your lifestyle, I know that when I was a second year doctor, I was walking all over the hospital, and I was getting like 15,000 steps a day, because obviously the hospital was bed blocked, and so we had geriatric patients in all four corners of the hospital. And just with really simple changes, I could be active. Our ward rounds were always on the go. We'd use the stairs. For some reason, I had a consultant that would only use the stairs going up, not down, but still we'd use the stairs a lot. And that is something to look back on and go, yeah, that was great. I don't have to beat myself up because I wasn't doing a running program outside of the gym, or I wasn't doing anything. That was benefiting me a huge amount.
Love it. And so let's talk about what, because a lot of doctors, the main objection is time. And we all have more, generally we have more commitments to our time when we're doctors than we have time. You have patients, you have your family, you have yourself. So let's talk about some of the days to integrate into the workday, some of the ways. How can doctors with limited time, integrate into their workday, or if they have small amounts of time, get in some decent workouts?
Celebrating and making sure you're not beating yourself up for not doing huge amounts is sort of step number one, because you're going to feel more burnt out, you're going to feel more tired and guilty and frustrated with yourself if you have this high expectation that when you're on a week of night shifts that you're not going to the gym 5 days a week. So sort of let yourself off from that. It's about finding the activity around your lifestyle, which will then really help. And again, with that asymmetric returns, there is a huge benefit. So real simple things. The number one thing I say to everyone is trying to use the stairs rather than the elevator. And it doesn't have to be the whole way. You know, I may be talking to some doctors here that they've got a hospital with 11 stories or something like that. I'm not saying every day you got to walk all the way to the top, but even if you just took it halfway, or, you know, just added in a few flights of steps here and there, again, that small change starts accumulating. If you're doing that, you know, 5, 6, 7 times a day, that accumulates really quick. So stairs over an elevator is definitely a big one, and you'll also find that will start to feed into your work group as well. You'll see other people being like, yeah, okay, I'll take the stairs with you, and they'll keep that conversation going. Another one definitely is moving meetings. So we had a habit of, we'd do a ward round and then we'd sit down for a coffee and sort of go through the list. And I'm not saying you have to be running around the hospital, but even if you're just stood up and still moving, or discussing those points on the ward round, actually on the round, again, that's more movement. It might feel like a small amount, but that all accumulates a lot more, and it's less sedentary time too.
Yeah, no, I was telling you about that. When I was in the wards and didn't have a lot of time, I would, every time I'd go to the bathroom, I'd do 10 explosive squat jumps. And obviously if you've got, you know, knee issues, it might just be squats rather than the explosive jumps. But I found, with coffee and hydration, you go to the bathroom quite a lot. So you're actually getting, you know, a fair bit of exercise in there during the day. And, you know, if anyone else is in there as well, it becomes a talking point, and maybe they start doing them too. Less people, it caught on a lot less than I expected it to. But, you know, just finding those ways, I think that's the first bit, is there are ways to integrate it. What about, you know, short workouts? Because, again, that's another thing, is I want to do some working out, but I can't, I don't have the hour available to do it. So what are some, you know, is there value in that?
Hugely. And I love to always come back to like the evidence and the research, and a limitation around research is you can't look at how effective 1 minute is. So the majority of research is limited to sort of 10 minutes plus of physical activity. Nonetheless, it shows that there's a benefit at the 10-minute mark. So whether we want to extrapolate or whatever, I think short workouts shouldn't be understated. And we can do different things. There'll be some people thinking, I'm at work, I don't want to get hot and sweaty doing a workout. And that's okay, because actually doing a sort of a flow or a stretch or something just to mindfully move your body has a huge impact on your mental health, on your sort of focus then, and also just on your stress. You know, like being the junior on a ward round and having a list as long as your arm, thinking, how am I going to manage this for the day? Taking 5 to 10 minutes, putting up a YouTube video with a yoga flow or even just some breath work, and being conscious for that part, guaranteed will make people more effective, not less effective for the rest of the day.
Look, I mean, I think, you know, anyone listening is probably understood. I think this is great, because it's like, actually, how do I fit it in? How do I lower the bar to go, actually, that's not letting myself down, that's actually serving myself. But, you know, you are a font of evidence-based knowledge in this space. So if anyone's not convinced, what are the stats? Give us the quick fire, why exercise matters.
It's unbelievable. And I think when I'm throwing out some statistics here, one thing that I try and get people to think about is, think about the anti-hypertensive agent that you're prescribing, you know, or the diabetes medications, and the benefits that you're quoted for prescribing a statin. These all have big, important impacts on cardiovascular risk and mortality. But then compare it to, for instance, let's say all-cause mortality. We found that physical activity, the lowest compared to the highest, when looking at men and women, can have a 20 to 30% reduction in their all-cause mortality. So your risk of dying from anything can be reduced by up to 30%. Like, find me a medication that does that. Again, cancer risk. I think a lot of people don't think about exercise and cancer, but physical activity is shown to benefit 13 types of cancers, and that's of what they're researching. And this is a growing field. I won't be surprised when actually they find that there's links with everything. And the way that's mediated is obviously loads of different things. We've got pain. Pain and quality of life I found really interesting because these are broader topics. These aren't disease specific things. This is really going to impact your day to day. And massively improves our pain scores, improves our quality of life scores. And again, we're talking about at the lower end of the scale. So the minimum requirement, the WHO requirement, is 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity. That's 2.5 hours of moderate movement a week. So it's not a huge bar that we've got to aim for. It all accumulates. But the thing that I think, talking about getting people actually going, okay, yeah, this is a good thing. I can talk about diabetes, cancer, all-cause mortality, heart attack, stroke, all of these things that really we all know, right? It's like saying that your smoking's bad. We know this. The thing that gets everyone moving more is the impact on mental health. And you don't have to have a mental illness. We all have mental health. And physical activity is shown to be as beneficial as the first line medical treatments, SSRIs and so on, for mild to moderate depression and anxiety alone. Just exercise and movement alone is as beneficial. And this is why people move. I've met one person, and I think he was just saying it to be difficult, but I've really not met many people that get out of bed and move more or do their explosive squats in the bathroom because they want to reduce their risk of cardiovascular disease. We do it to feel better, to function better. And again, the evidence shows that it's really beneficial on our mental health too. The list is, I've got a whole spreadsheet of different things, but I'm not finding any negatives.
Excellent, excellent. Only upside. So exercise. I think that's great. There's a mindset piece around what it is and how to achieve it, and it's actually the bar is much lower than we set it. So let's talk about diet. And again, we all know that you're working in a hospital. There are some challenges to good diet. So let's work out how we can approach it. What are some principles, and how we can actually go about doing it.
I personally think the same rules here apply. We want to talk about the foundation of this, the basic principles, because there's no point knowing all of the clever things if actually you can't apply this knowledge to a busy life.
Yeah. If it's too complicated, then yeah.
Yeah. And that's important, I think, to talk to our audience of doctors, because we're used to complicated. We like knowing the complicated things. And if anything, it makes us quite dismissive of the simple things, like, oh, we know that, we don't need to. But actually, if you're not getting the basic things right, you're really doing yourself a disservice. And so when I talk, there's a lot about diet, but when I talk about diet, two important things: understanding our macronutrients. Again, we've taught about this at medical school. So our carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and then we've got vitamins and minerals. Understanding what we should be getting in and what good targets, what things to be cautious of, or what things to try and get more of in our diet. And then also calories. And I'm not telling everyone that they need to go calorie count, but calorie as a form of energy, that's how much fuel we're putting in our body. And if we're giving ourselves too many calories, we're going to be putting on weight and putting on fat. And if we're not fueling ourselves enough, which again, doctors, we're in both of these categories, then we're going to be exhausted and we're going to be burnt out more. We're going to get tired, and that's going to affect our sleep. It's going to affect how we function on our ward rounds and with our patients. And so knowing that you need to be putting in enough food and just the basic things, proteins, fats, carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals, that's how simple I think we should keep it. Until you're nailing that, I don't think there's a point in making sure you've got 5 extra grams of chia seeds to make sure your day's going to be better, if that makes sense.
Interesting. So not the latest fad on Instagram. So you're saying the starting point is, let's think about this as fuel. Let's fuel the machine. So you mentioned, and this is where I would find, okay, great. In the past, I'd look at it and go, and what does that mean? And we're talking macronutrients. It just all got really complicated. So what are the key principles in terms of what we're focusing on? Then let's talk about how we can achieve that.
Everyone's probably heard this, but preparing with diet is one of the most important things. And the little bit of effort you put into preparing food before your day, whether it's doing it on a Sunday and preparing for the week, or whether it's the night before when you cook dinner, you also make breakfast and lunch the next day, those sort of things have a huge benefit. Because if we don't do that, then, and this is what I used to do, I'd be at work, I didn't have lunch, and so I'd go to the cafe. And the cafe always just had foods that were really high in fat. They weren't really that nutritious. They were expensive, so that was a shame. And yeah, you'd be filled up with caffeine more than anything, rather than good sources of food. So preparing sort of like snack boxes, and whether those are protein heavy snack boxes, so with some like fish or with some chicken, or a protein source, or if it is trying to get more of your fiber, your fruit and vegetables into a snack box, then that can be your little stop off point, whether it's between patients or whether it's just when you finish the ward round. That's the bit that you usually dip and reach for the unhealthy snacks. If you might need to stock up on Tupperware. That's what I found. But having those prepared foods was really helpful. And in terms of, like you say, Sam, I know I've mentioned macronutrients, but what does that look like? What that looks like is trying to not have really fat-rich foods, which is a lot of the stuff, a lot of like chocolate bars and a lot of the stuff that you get at like bakeries and the cafe would usually have a lot of fats in them, but instead having oats. My standard day, oats with some protein powder for breakfast and some fruit on top of that. And then I'd have a mid-morning snack. So I'd prepare like a yogurt with some fruit, and there'd usually be like a higher protein yogurt. And then I might have like a muesli bar or something as well. And then I'd have my lunch. I started going for ready meals, which I know some people were like, don't do ready meals. They're, the things you put in your microwave. But again, it was convenient. I knew what was in it. It had the right amount of sort of calories and macronutrients, and the convenience over anything. 2 minutes in the microwave, I could wolf that down. And if you're a busy doctor in a hospital, perfect. Um, and the things that I find the majority of people need to do is increase their protein. We're always thinking we've got to reduce the amount of carbohydrates and calories. Most people aren't eating enough protein, and also increase their fruit and veg, which tends to make us feel fuller, so we don't overconsume, the chocolate bars and the crappy stuff. And it also gives us a sort of longer lasting energy, rather than the peaks and troughs of like those higher sugary things.
I mean, and I think that's the great thing is the key. Make it simple. We were talking about this as you just said now. More protein over carbs. Three things that have helped me: more protein over carbs, more fiber. So increase fruit and veggies. Pick an apple over a chocolate bar. Not rocket science. More natural over refined. If you kind of just put those three things in place and then set yourself up to win. I'm the same. I have, meals. I was finding, I would just, because I'm not that into food, I would just default to protein shakes, which obviously is not particularly healthy. But a meal service that comes again, you've got to heat it up, and you could say of course it's better to cook everything from natural at home, but I wasn't doing it. So the next best is to go have meals delivered that I stick in the microwave, and I get, it's the 80, 20% gives you the 80% of the results. So, and then as a doctor, it's, there's a few things, around actually making sure that you keep that fuel the engine through the day. So you have breaks, have someone hold your pager while you eat lunch, actually make it a priority. Otherwise, as you say, you default back to a low state of caffeine and sugar, which is not a sustainable way to fuel the machine.
Yeah. And I'm definitely at fault of doing this. I really underestimate how short fused, how much compassion I don't have when I'm hungry. And I think one way for our fellow doctors to figure this out is to try it out. You don't have to suddenly be eating the perfect diet. Just try small things. Try, packing a little snack box and asking a friend to hold your pager and see how you feel. And if you're like, oh wow, I just had a much better conversation with that patient. We were on the same page. I felt more compassionate. maybe this is not the worst advice in the world, and you can build on that. And we're not saying, throw away everything in your cupboards and start fresh. It's just make some small changes and reflect.
It is important. I mean, I think anyone who's as parents understands it. I go to horse shows with my daughters and they're riding. And, one of my main jobs is to make sure they're getting nutritious snacks throughout the day because, because they won't think about it. But then they get to a point at 1 o'clock and they're grumpy and they're not riding as well because they're kind of not focused. And, that's kind of a doctor at 1 o'clock as well. Grumpy with, and snappy and not practicing as good medicine. Like, we're all just the same. And so it is important, and so making it a priority. So, and it leads into the next bit, which is if we don't make it a priority and we feed up on caffeine and sugar, then we're going to impact the final pillar, which is sleep. So let's talk about sleep.
Again, hugely important. And I always think about the basic thing. I think it might have been you that had said this, Sam, about like the HALT acronym. If things aren't going well, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I late? Am I tired? And this is the tired one. We don't function well when we're tired. There's a few areas of being a doctor that are really quite worrying about this. The thing that really got me, and I spent the last 5 years working in emergency as a shift worker, that actually it reduces our life expectancy doing shift work. And we may be talking to people that this is your life and this is your career. So I'm not saying bail. What I'm saying is let's be mindful of that and find out how we can improve it so that the impact isn't as big. The thing that scared me as well is the studies looking at the comparison between like alertness with driving on sleep deprivation and essentially like the equivalent to drunk driving. And I think we all have worked hard and we've done long shifts and we wear it as like a badge of honor. And actually, if you were talking to a friend that was like, I drove home after 10 beers, you'd say that's not okay. But we're like, I drove home after a 12, 13, 14-hour shift and I was exhausted. Might be the same. So we need to sort of, in the cold light of day, say this is really important. Maybe let's not just drive ourselves into an early grave. Sleep does matter. It's not a weakness. It's not I can run on 4 hours of sleep. There may be times that you have to, but actually the more we can focus on having good sleep hygiene, making a priority of sleep, treating it like an important part of the day. And that was a big turn for me because I was one of those people that was always proud that I could run on 5 or 6 hours of sleep. Now I've got a different lifestyle. I run on 7.5 to 8 sometimes, and I'm a much nicer human being. So I think, value it is point number one, right?
And you mentioned sleep hygiene. What does that mean? And what does that mean specifically for a doctor, a busy doctor?
So sleep hygiene, talking about all the things we can do around sleep to make us more set up for sleep. So this includes caffeine intake, which is probably, not to generalize, it's probably the most important part for doctors, running on energy drinks and coffees, especially when we're doing shift work. So making sure that we've got a window before we sleep, that you haven't just had a Monster energy drink or something like that. It may also include some sort of ritual before sleep, whether that's reading, whether that's mindful practice, gratitude journaling, excuse me, things like that. And again, it's really easy to sort of think, no, I don't need to do that. Try it and then tell me how that goes. I'd much rather we gave it a go and thought, oh, actually, that really helped. For me, it's reading. I don't do enough of it, but reading before bed, no matter what time of day, it must just do something to my nervous system. I'm suddenly no longer in that stress, fight or flight. It's quite mindful because you're just present in the book and then you're ready to sleep. But this is the other thing that I think we underestimate with sleep hygiene. This may include getting blackout curtains. It may include getting earplugs, getting your eye mask. As shift workers, if you're going to sleep in the morning, actually you have to treat yourself differently. You can't just think, oh, okay, I'll wind down because the guy mowing his lawn next door isn't a problem. These things are a problem. And you're not helping yourself by making it harder. If anything, the easier you can make it. If devices go down, everything's on do not disturb. if your friends know not to come knocking on your door because you've just done a night shift, that sort of stuff. And it might take a bit of preparation as well, just like with your diet. Letting people know I've got to run a 5 night shifts. Between these hours, I'm going to have to wind down actually. You might not hear from me. If that gives you better quality sleep and better duration of sleep, then do that.
As a doctor, and a lot of my life has been something that I had real challenges with, what you've said, it very much resonates. And I think the thing I'd add is, and it's interesting, I saw a sleep specialist and he told me, here's what you have to do. And it was very, very specific. Didn't and I wasn't allowed to read in bed before I went to sleep, because apparently, bed is for sleep, and that didn't work for me. So I think the other part, because I'm the same, if I don't have a book, I can't actually fall asleep. Yes, it's a crutch, but it's okay. You generally have a book. So I think the other part is, you've got to experiment and find what works very specifically for each of us, because we're all so different. And then, if sleep is a priority, but B also, can be a challenge, then getting your own routine and then protecting that routine. Not letting, as you say, particularly on night shifts and things, not letting life derail the routine, because the cost is that another sleepless night, another crappy day. It's like you actually have to, almost fiercely protect it. And that means turning off your phone so you don't check your emails. Emails, at 9 o'clock at night that get you, worse. So you really have to actually, fiercely protect that thing so that you can achieve the sleep which sets you up for the next day.
Definitely. And I think we touched on it when we've talked about this before. Like, if that includes medication, again, we don't want people to have these sort of crutches, but there are times, and it may be going into a run of nights or coming out of a run of nights or something like this, where actually this doesn't happen all the time, and we're at risk of getting to a really negative cycle where we then have another fatigue day. So if you need melatonin or even temazepam or a Phenergan or whatever it is, and I'd even recommend people, if they've got a doctor, actually their GP, rather than just your friend, your colleague, it's okay to talk to your doctor. The first time I talked to my GP about melatonin, he was so like, of course, sleep's really, really important. And it was like quite validating for me. I was like, oh, here's me thinking I'm almost weak and ill and this is a problem. When actually you're like, yeah, let's get you sleeping well.
Absolutely. And you're right. You want to get the GP involved. 20 years ago, when I was a junior doctor, prescribing each other diazepam, it's less acceptable these days with the medical council. I agree 100%. Like, in an ideal world, you don't need sleeping pills. Night shift is not an ideal world. So if you need them, I used to use them as well, because it was like, if I didn't have a Zopiclone, I didn't sleep at all, and that was worse than having a Zopiclone sleep. Silly side story where I would, and this is not recommended either. I was only like a 5-minute drive from the hospital, but I'd take the Zopiclone when I left, so that I was ready to sleep as soon as I got home. One time I was driving back and it was a snow day, and so I got a bit excited and I drove off somewhere to go and do some donuts in the snow in my car. And then the Zopiclone was sleeping again, so I managed to crash the car on the way down the hill. So there's practicalities and safe ways to do it. But I think, to do your point, it's like, you've got to we need to value it, and the stats support that. If we want to, A, enjoy our lives, but B, actually be good doctors, it is important. So find what that sleep hygiene is, what our own personal prescription is essentially, and then manage it. So if we've got those 3 areas, this has been fantastic, and I think what I liked about this and what I liked about preparing for this with you was this isn't that complicated. Exercise, it's actually understand that you're doing a whole lot of it. The mind-body connection is important. Fit it in where you can. Lower the bar, knowing that you're going to get most of the benefits. That's important information. I didn't have it as a junior doctor. And so, it was the all or nothing. So you're better to do some. The diet, think about it as fueling the system. Choose protein over carbs when you can. Pick fiber where you can. Pick your fruit and veggies. Go natural over refined. Again, it's not rocket science. A little bit of preparation and you're good to go. With sleep, it's important. what is my personal sleep hygiene routine, and then do it. So I think the key, the important part is this is not that difficult when you have the knowledge. And I think the beauty of this conversation has been now anyone listening really has the knowledge. They're really empowered. And I would imagine if you're listening or watching this, you've gone, actually, this is actually really not that complicated. It's pretty simple. This is like, what is the 10 or 20% that I can do to get to the 80, 90% of results? So I guess with anyone listening, I'd say the first step is here, find that why. We talked about why it's important, but find what your personal why is, and find what the motivator is. And I'll give you an example from my life. I was finding I wasn't being very consistent with things, and I had a why, and it was all about my health and enjoying life and blah blah blah, and that was all of me. But actually, the thing that shifted it was and be a role model for my kids. When I said I'm not being a great role model in terms of how I'm looking after myself, that shifted everything. We had our conversation preparing for this. And I was like, you know what I should do? I should do some more walking. And I thought I should, and I didn't. And then what's got me consistent with walking? I've got a 16-year-old staffy who used to love going walking and can't walk now. So I've got him a trolley, and I go for my walks now towing my dog in the trolley. And that's the motivator. It's like, okay, fine. If that's what motivates, find what the real motivator is for you. And then make a plan. How are you going to move? How are you going to set yourself up to win within the busy life of being a doctor? Sleep. How are you going to plan? How are you going to prepare? How are you going to set yourself up to win? Eating. It's important. How am I going to plan and prepare? Like this is the kind of listening to you. It's like, okay, it's not complicated, and it needs planning. It needs preparation. It needs prioritization. So, I hear all that and I go, this is great. This is an area that anyone can master. It's also an area that has a huge compounding effect on your entire life and practice. So it's one of those things that a small amount of input can have a massive impact on your life, which I think is really exciting. So, Ash, thank you. I've loved this conversation. I think, it's been enjoyable, but it's been so valuable, I think, to myself, but to anyone listening. What would you like to leave people with? What's your final message for anyone who may have struggled in this area in the past? Or anyone who's going into a busy period as a doctor, what would be your final message?
I think for me the thing that's been most valuable, and this may make people feel uncomfortable, is flipping that sort of the advice around. We're the advice givers, right? We're the doctors. We're the ones that tell people how to do things. And you mentioned being a role model. For me, it's very much practicing what you preach. But that can come with this really high expectation, especially amongst doctors. So instead, I think about, how would I talk to me as the patient with that level of compassion that hopefully I can bring to that conversation. Because if they said they're exhausted from their day, their busy family life, their single parent life, I wouldn't say, well, why aren't you doing 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity? I'd be like, yeah, that's a lot. I wonder what we can change. Can we improve sleep? Even just a little bit. Is there one day that we can get a bit of help and protect some sleep? Not every day. Is there something in your diet we can change? Again, you don't have to be perfect now. And I'd be talking about the smallest incremental changes with that patient. But we don't talk to ourselves like that, do we? And for me, trying to talk to yourself like a patient, as uncomfortable as that may feel, because I have no doubt the majority of people listening to this are good, compassionate doctors, but they're probably just not giving themselves that same advice. And we know, like we've just said, that 10% is where the money is. And so it doesn't have to be big changes. The smallest incremental changes pay off.
One thing I've loved about this series is everything's interrelated. We're talking about mind, we're talking about body, we're talking about purpose, we're talking about burnout, we're talking about winning on the wards. They all reference each other. And also a common thread is actually the need to be kind to yourself. And actually, as you say, talk to yourself as you talk to other people. So I think that's a great message to finish with. So Ash, thank you so much for your time and preparation for this. It's been valuable for me. I'm sure it's been valuable to anyone listening or watching. And to anyone listening and watching, you know, I hope this has set you up for success in this area, because the compounding effects are huge. So thank you, Ash, and thank you to you listeners.